So it's Friday, May 31st, 2019. I'm talking to Andrew Macleod about, well, I'm going to discuss what it's about in a second. But first, let me light this candle here. Yeah, we need hope for this conversation. So welcome to Potkaars. And that's Andrew Macleod. Welcome.
Hi, you caught me in my gym gear this morning.
Yeah, I'm dressing up for the guy. I was expecting you in a suit. You're a lawyer, aren't you?
I am a lawyer. Don't hold that against me. So I don't always wear a suit and tie.
No, but
I've got this incurable disease that I'm trying to fight. It's called aging. So I'm doing the best that I can each morning in the gym to beat this incurable disease called aging.
I was interviewing a guy that's into cryptocurrencies last Wednesday. He comes in a suit and tie, and I'm, why are you dressing up like that? I mean, you've got money. He said, well, if I don't, I look so young.
Well, that's the other side. I'm 52. I'm trying to be 15 again.
Yeah, okay. Well, we'll get to that at the end of the conversation. So what this thing is about, when I was figuring out how to call this interview, I was looking at documents and I came up with, we're going to talk about child sexual exploitation and abuse by aid workers and peacekeepers. So that's a nice cognitive dissonant title taken from a report out of 2018 by Save the Children. Then I went to your website, heartheircries.org, and it throws into your face, we're going to be stopping child rape and sexual abuse.
Yeah.
So that's what we're going to talk about. So
let me start off, if I can, by setting some context for people, because you're right, there's a bit of cognitive dissonance there, and a lot of your listeners or viewers might be quite shocked. To shock you a little bit further, say that the scale of child abuse and child rape in the aid industry is far higher than that in the Catholic Church. And when people look at me and go, hang on, where do you get that from? I say, think about it this way. There are more aid workers than there are Catholic Church priests, in more countries than the Catholic Church is present in, with better access to children and controlling things like food, water, and shelter. What makes us think that the average aid worker is ethically any better than the average Catholic Church priest? It's just a simple matter of maths. The National Crime Agency here in the United Kingdom estimates that the underlying prevalence of pedophilia within the male community is about 1 in 35 men, about 3%. Now, how they get that number, don't know. Do I trust the National Crime Agency's analysis? Yes, I do. The Child Abuse Inquiry in Australia found that 7% of the Catholic clergy participated in child abuse. So if your underlying prevalence is 3% and an industry that attracts these sorts of people is at 7%, where is the aid industry? Well, the National Crime Agency helps us here too. They have been warning since 1999, that's 20 years. They have been warning, as we crack down on predatory pedophiles in the developed world, the predators now go to the developing world to get access to children. And their words, not mine, chosen methodology to get access to children is to join a children's charity. Now, that is shocking, but logical. The moment you think about it, you go, well, yeah, of course, that's where the predators go. Predators are not stupid. Predators are rat cunning. And if we need to beat them, we need to apply the rat cunning back to them. So, of course, they're going to places where there are no police forces, no civil society, no enforcement, and where they've got access to children and have food, water, and shelter that they can give kids. So if the underlying prevalence is about 3% and industries that attract pedophiles are about 7%, like the Catholic Church, where's the aid industry? Well, it's probably heading towards 7%, but let's call it somewhere in the middle. Let's call it 5%. Yeah. There are about 500,000 aid workers in the world. 300,000 of them are male, 5% of which is 15,000. Is it a fair assumption to say that in the world today, there is probably somewhere around about 15,000 men with pedophilic tendencies working in the aid industry? Well, that's what the data would suggest. Yeah. So that's how big a problem we've got.
Excellent. So we're not going to downplay anything in this conversation. But before we dig into this further, maybe you can say something about what you have been doing for United Nations and other aid organizations over the last...
I think that's a really, really good thing to point out. I'm not a typical right-wing love child of Newt Gingrich and Sarah Palin trying to tear down the aid industry. You know, I actually come out of the left wing of politics, and I committed myself when I was in my late teens that I wanted to spend my life making the world better. And I wanted to work for the International Committee for the Red Cross or the UN High Commission for Refugees. And in my life, I've done both. In the 1990s, I worked for the ICRC and former Yugoslavia and Rwanda and places like that. As I like to put it, every country ending in Stan that doesn't have an up-to-date tourist guide. And for the UN, I worked as head of early warning and emergency preparedness for the High Commission for Refugees. And I ran a number of major natural disaster operations like the Pakistan earthquake, recovery from some Philippines typhoons and floods, done some small arms work in Tajikistan and Niger. So I've worked in a lot of countries and seen a lot of the interaction on the ground. And I left the UN in 2009, and I cited 3 reasons. 1, its lack of efficiency, lack of effectiveness, and lack of desire to be held accountable. 2, I'd come to the subjective opinion, and this is very carefully chosen words, a subjective opinion on balance that the system is a net harm. Yes, it does some good stuff. Yes, it does some bad stuff. Does the good outweigh the bad, or does the bad outweigh the good? I believe the bad outweighs the good. And the 3rd reason is the institutional failure to crack down on the pedophilia. Kofi Annan himself wrote in his book, the largest professional regret he had was not stopping the genocide in Rwanda. His 2nd largest professional regret was not stopping the pedophilia of UN staff. Ban Ki-moon has said something similar. This is 20 years of leadership at the top of the UN that knows this is a problem. The Save the Children report you referred to earlier, it wasn't 2018, it was 2008.
Yeah, that's what I meant to say.
Yeah. Referred back to what became known as the food for sex scandals in the early 2000s. And you also have the whistleblower scandal from Bosnia in 1995. In other words, when you go back into and you look at it, everyone in power has known or ought to have known this is a problem for more than 20 years. And that's why I'm saying this is on a scale like the Catholic Church. In many ways, it's worse, because at least the victims of Catholic Church abuse had mothers who had voices who could speak up in Boston, in Melbourne, in Dublin. Who is speaking up for the children raped by aid workers in the developing world, where the mothers are just as powerless as the children are, and where the International Development Committee of the House of Commons here in the United Kingdom says that the entire aid industry has been complacent to the level of complicit and putting the reputation of their agencies before the reputation of the children. So who's looking after these children? The great irony, and now I'm going on a big rant, the great irony on this is a group of middle-aged white men without children who have come together and gone, actually, we need to stop this. And of course, we all know middle-aged white men are the big problem in the world today because everyone hates middle-aged white men. But it's a group of middle-aged white men who have come together and said, actually, we've got to stop this. Yeah. And that's why we set up Hear Their Cries. We need to raise the awareness, understand what's happening out there, but just as importantly, put out real workable solutions to stop this.
Excellent. So, yeah, that's why I invited you also. So I want to know, we're going to walk through some of those whistleblowers or some of those reportings that have been done and look at the response on that. Yeah. And then that's what my question to you is. So if that doesn't work, what should we do then as an international community and as aging white men and all the rest of us?
And it doesn't work. And anyone who's interested, in any of your listeners or viewers who are shocked right now, I urge them to Google the International Development Committee of the House of Commons report on sexual exploitation and abuse in the aid industry. So they can get the data, they can get the background, they can realize this is not just some right-wing fruitcake calling from the top of a mountain or deep down a cave. This is a real and genuine problem. And the headline of that International Development Committee report, complacent to the level of complicit and putting their reputations before the protection of the children. That's the critical thing to understand. What are the aid industry scared of? If we actually saw the level of child abuse that's happening in the aid industry, how many people would donate to the aid industry? Almost no one. I certainly hope almost nobody. Yeah. So that's why the aid industry keeps all of this covered up. It is about money, as horrible as it sounds. And the aid industry is just as brutal about money as anybody else is. So what do we need to do to stop this?
Now, hang on. Yep. On a positive note, at least it's not about child abuse then. But that could also be an incentive.
Well,
I'm not ruling that out.
That's actually a very important thing to say, because what I'm not saying there is a secret conspiracy of pedophiles all bringing each other in. Yeah. I'm saying it's a complete failure of management to prevent what is an underlying natural occurrence in humanity of about 3% of the human population have pedophilic tendencies. So it's not a great conspiracy. It's just a failure of leadership.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So let's try to make it more concrete then. So in 2008, that report came out, Save the Children, elaborated on food for sex. And there's examples in there, like for $3 and a bit of chocolate. again, there's my cognitive dissonance. So I'm finding it hard
So let me make it worse for you.
Yeah.
There's a thing called survival sex.
Yeah.
So you're the mother of a starving family or the father of a starving family, and you turn up to a refugee camp and say, we'd like to come in and have some food, please. And the aid worker says, fine, so long as I have your oldest child. And you look across and you've got a number of children, a 3-year-old, a 7-year-old, a 9-year-old, a 12-year-old, and a 14-year-old. And you turn around to your 14-year-old daughter and you say, listen, dear, hate to say this to you, but if you give yourself to this man, we get enough food for the rest of the family. And it's a horrible circumstance that the mother is put in. Do you sell one child to keep the other 4 or 5 alive? That's real. That happens daily. And if you Google Madagascar and the 2 cyclones, so not Madagascar, Mozambique, and the 2 cyclones that came through Mozambique this year, already the reports are coming out of exactly this happening, where people in power are saying to victims, you can only get access to food if I have access to your children. And this survival sex, where people are put in this horrible situation where you've got to sacrifice one child for the good of 4 or 5 others, you can kind of understand, but really uncomfortable about this. But what I really hate in this is the aid worker knows this, and he's deliberately manipulating this. He's evil because he's doing 2 wrongs. He's abusing the mother by putting her in this choice, and then he's abusing the child. This will be shocking to your listeners and readers, and all I can say to them is I say to everybody else when I raise this with people is, don't believe a word I say. Check it. Google it. Prove that this is not fake news. And once you Google this, if you Google United Nations Food for Sex Africa, see what comes up. If you Google survival sex, see what comes up. This is not fake news. This is horrible, and it can be stopped.
All right. So now there was this whistleblower or UN field director or journalist, I don't know how you would describe him, Mr. Anders Kompas, Swedish guy, who was fired, right?
Yep.
And so could you explain here what was his whistleblowing, apparently, and he was fired for?
So Anders Kompas has done what I've done and several others have done. He's blown the whistle on the whole child abuse, the whole cover-up, the whole systematic way in which it's covered up, okay? So there's not a systematic conspiracy bringing pedophiles in, but there is a systematic cover-up to keep it quiet. And it's usually addressed and hidden in academic language. Sexual exploitation and abuse, SEA. Let's downplay it. Let's take the emotion out of it. The reason we at Hear Their Cry say stop child rape in aid is we want people to be emotional. We want people to get angry, because the people that we're fighting are those who are diminishing it, downplaying it. No. It's sexual exploitation and abuse. It's SEA. There's no emotion in those 3 letters, SEA. There is emotion in the phrase child rape. And SEA is child rape, or to put it in the words of an 11-year-old girl in Bangui, Central African Republic, I didn't have breasts yet, and he still raped me. That comes from an 11-year-old girl. And how dare the academics call that sexual exploitation and abuse? How dare the academics label that girl with the 3 letters SEA? No, she was a rape victim and a child rape victim. And that's what we need to understand. So when people like Anders Kompas come out and start blowing the whistle and start saying the sort of things like I'm saying, of course he gets fired. There's that old saying, you can either work inside the tent or outside the tent. He, for years, tried to fix the system from inside. But at the end of the day, you can't fix the system from the inside, because those in power know one thing. If the sheer weight of numbers, thousands of victims at the hands of the UN over the last number of years, if that came out into public, there is no way in hell people would donate their money.
Yeah. Well, you want a multi-layer approach. You want to fix it from the inside and from the outside. So he went out of his way to do it from the inside, and then he got fired. Now the reason I
started from the inside and ended up coming to the outside. You know, when my last posting for the United Nations was in the Philippines. So it is no surprise at all that that's what made me the most angry. You can imagine what I saw in the Philippines with some of my work colleagues. And when I reported that up the chain, nothing.
Yeah. Yeah, well, we'll get back to that in a few moments. Why I bring up Anders Kompas is because the Jordan Prince Zayed Raad Al Hussein, if I pronounce it right, don't matter, got a Human Rights Tulip Award from my Minister of Foreign Affairs, Mr. Blok, last August. Now, Anders Kompas was fired by that prince. So
Yes,
he's
he
the
was.
guy who actually fired Anders Kompas. And there were questions asked in our parliament to our
Yeah.
minister, do you know about this situation? Why are you awarding this prince
Yeah.
with a human rights tulip? Now, the answer given was, Secretary General of the United Nations has investigated, and the prince didn't abuse his power, so all is good. And we think we should protect whistleblowers. So there was a nice cognitive dissonant answer, but we're giving awards out to the cover-up. So that's how it struck me. So if that happens, it's not just United Nations. This is the Netherlands. What's your take on that?
It's all the way through the system, because a Pakistani general said to me once, he said, Andrew, who knows more about a Pakistani villager, you or me? And I looked at him and I said, well, you do, sir, you're the Pakistani. He said, no, Andrew, you do, because you actually go there and talk to these people, whereas I can't. I'm too senior in my society to do this. And if I asked you who's got more in common, Angela Merkel with Vladimir Putin, or Angela Merkel with a villager in Eastern Germany where Angela Merkel came from? Now, most people would say, well, she has more in common with the villager because they're both from Eastern Germany. I'm like, no, she has more in common with Vladimir Putin, not because she's a bad person. I actually like Angela Merkel, but she's part of that elite of society. She makes world-changing decisions. Angela Merkel and Vladimir Putin can empathize with each other as co-world leaders. There's no way the villager in Eastern Germany can empathize with Angela Merkel or vice versa. Like they had on TV here the other day, the Queen of England went to a display celebrating Sainsbury's history, and they had to teach her on how to use an electronic checkout in the supermarket. She's the Queen. Of course, she never goes to the damn supermarket. But what she got more in common with Donald Trump or the villager in outer England, truth is with Donald Trump, even though she probably hates him, because Donald Trump never goes to a supermarket, the Queen never goes to the supermarket, the villagers do. Yeah. And what you then have within the elite of societies, you've got ministers, you've got prime ministers, you've got bureaucrats that have more in common with each other across countries than with their own people. What you therefore have is they all want to protect the system. The last thing ministers of, say, foreign affairs or ministers of foreign aid want to do is blow the whistle on all the horrible things that's happening in the aid industry, because the left-wing constituency in our home countries right now is satisfied that we're giving X% of money to the UN. We're not actually analysing the impact of this money. Are we actually bringing people out of poverty? And the underlying answer to this is no. So you're not going to get the foreign affairs minister actually understanding what the problem with the former High Commissioner for Human Rights is, because they're empathetic at the level of global governance, where you compromise things where they'll never say it out loud. They'll never say it out loud. But what they actually think is these horrible things are the cost of doing business.
Sure. All right. So you've been doing your work from United Nations and other organizations, and then a little over a year ago, you wrote a memo or a report to United Nations.
Yeah.
Going into these things. That was. So my question to you is, how was that picked up internally in United Nations? And then the second question is, you volunteered it to The Sun as a media outlet. They reported on it. So how was response to that one?
So let me just set a bit more context. The headline figure that The Sun reported was inaccurate. The Sun reported that we said there were 60,000 victims of rape at the hands of the United Nations in the last 10 years. We didn't say that. We actually said 60,000 victims of sexual exploitation, abuse and rape. And that's very, very different. So we're including workplace harassment and things like this, not just rape. So The Sun misconstrued it a little, which was unfortunate. The UN didn't like it, and they said our numbers are wrong. And we said, okay, what's the real number?
Yeah.
Silence, right? Every single person who's criticized us and said that you're exaggerating, we've always answered and said, okay, well, what's your number?
Yeah.
We know our number is low. So let me walk through how we calculated that number. So 60,000 incidents of sexual exploitation and abuse in the last decade at the hands of the UN. In 2016, the United Nations admitted to 316 accusations of sexual exploitation and child rape at the hands of UN peacekeepers. 316 in 2016 alone. Now, the UN has a strong peacekeeping side, but it also has a strong civilian side, humanitarian support, development, and things like this. I've been in the military. and I've been a civilian aid worker. I know how both worlds work. When you're in the military, you're deployed for 3 to 6 months. You come back home into a barracks, you're always surrounded by your colleagues, you have very little private interaction with the civilian population. When you're a civilian aid worker, you're deployed for 1 to 3 years. You go back to private accommodation where you have your own privacy and you have direct interaction with the civilian population. To whom is the civilian population more vulnerable? The people in the military who are there for a short time, who go back to barracks and don't have privacy, or for the people who are there for a long time, do have privacy and have direct access to children? I have always said the vulnerability with the civilian side of the UN is much larger than the vulnerability with the military side. So the peacekeeping military side admit to 316 victims of sexual exploitation and abuse. Under our pressure, we finally got the UN Secretary General to admit his words in the high-level panel on the wings of the 2017 General Assembly. Contrary to what some people believe, the problem of sexual exploitation and abuse is not a problem of peacekeeping. It is a problem of the broader UN system and, his words, probably bigger outside of peacekeeping. And I'm like, hallelujah, that's exactly what I've been saying. Yeah. So if you've got 316 victims inside peacekeeping and your problem is larger outside of peacekeeping, then it's got to be at least 317 victims, right? maybe 1,000, maybe 2,000, maybe 10,000. Yeah. But if the problem is 316 here and this one's bigger, it's got to be at least 317.
Fair enough.
So let's add 316 to 317 and then lower it down to the nearest round number, 600, right? 300 and something plus 300 and something, let's call it 600. So that's an extremely conservative assumption that the problem on the civilian side is going to be only 317. Let's make it even more conservative by rounding it down to 600, right? Now, so that's 600 known victims in a single year at the hands of the UN. In the United Kingdom, 1 in 7 rapes is reported. How many abuses do you think would be reported in the developing world? More or less than in the United Kingdom?
That will be less, right?
It'd be less. How much less?
Yeah, who knows? How are you going to investigate this?
Take a guess.
I would assume it wouldn't be reported at all. I mean, this is food for your family, so you're not going to report anything.
1 in 50, 1 in 100. It's going to be very few, right?
Yeah.
So we're going to be really conservative. Let's assume it's 1 in 10. Yeah. Is that an exaggeration or conservative?
I wouldn't know. I'm no expert. I'd call it conservative. I'm with you.
Exactly. Yeah. So 1 in 7 in the UK, 1 in 10 against the aid industry. So 600 known victims, if 1 in 10 report, represents 6,000 real victims in a single year.
Yeah. There you go.
Multiply that by 10, you got 60,000 in a decade. So when you break down our assessment methodology, and we published our assessment methodology, and we always said, and these are very carefully chosen academic words, it's not data, it's an estimate. Yeah. Data needs a lot more rigor. This is an estimate. And we think not only is it a fair estimate, it's an incredibly conservative estimate. There is, in fact, a Swedish government report that looked at sexual exploitation and abuse at the hands of aid victims, just looking at women between the ages of 18 and 35. And they found an academic report, 59,000 victims in the last 9 years. Wait for this, just in Monrovia, let alone Liberia, let alone the rest of the world. So this number that we use is incredibly small. We should be absolutely criticized for underestimating the problem. But what does it say that the whole industry comes back and says, you're overestimating the problem, to which we reply, okay, what's your number?
And then they're silent. Yeah. Okay. A slightly different topic, but I talked to Mr. Alfred de Zayas a couple of months back. Mm-hmm. And he was describing to me the workings of the United Nations, or how that thing works. And he says, well, it's not, you shouldn't look at it as a single entity. United Nations basically is a group of nations, right? So it's the ethics or the character, or if you will, of the United Nations is the sum of its members.
Yes, that's right.
So you see that the same way.
And I'll go even further. The way I often describe it is I say there is no such thing as the United Nations. There's a whole bunch of discoordinated agencies with the letters U and N in front of their name, a fascination with the color blue, and then that's it.
Okay.
Different human resource systems, different fundraising systems, different reporting mechanisms. Do you know, no one actually knows how many UN funds, organizations, and programs are there? And I was doing when I was doing my last projects in the UN, we had a big meeting about UN reform, and I just simply asked this question: how many UN agencies, funds, and programs are there? UNICEF, UNDP, WHO, ILO, ILU, etc., etc., etc. No one could agree on the number.
No, okay.
35, 40, 45. No one actually knows. And the fact that there is the Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, which is an office which is supposed to coordinate the offices of the UN. What does it say about the organization that it actually needs a division just to coordinate itself?
Yeah. Okay, so we've established that that's the makings of the United Nations as an organization.
Yeah. And it's not fair to blame the UN, because what I was talking about was just the agencies and structures. What you were talking about is the nation states that actually make it up. And we say, oh, the UN's not doing this or the UN's not doing that. No, the collective will of the member states isn't doing it. And at the end of the day, the UN can only do what the member states allow it to do.
Okay, that's exactly what I wanted to lay down, because now I want to make it one step further. If we report about so and so many thousand rape victims yearly by UN aid workers, then referring to Secretary General researching it, that's not going to solve anything. I mean, but how are we going to address this then, if we're not going to go top down through United Nations organization?
Yeah. So I say the solution needs to come around another 3 letters, not SEA, but PDP: prevention, detection, prosecution. These are the key things. Now, to get very technical and legal here, the way criminal law normally works is a country will write the law and that law applies in their country. So if you speed your car in Germany, the Dutch police can't do anything because the Dutch police control Dutch speeding laws. Yeah. And generally, that's all crime. So if I rape a woman in the Democratic Republic of Congo, can the British police arrest me? The answer is no. But then we have an exception. We have a thing called extraterritorial law, where countries assert its law outside its own borders. And what we've seen over the last number of years is nicknamed the child sex tourism laws. In the United Kingdom, it's Section 72 of the Sexual Offences Act, which makes it unlawful for any British national or any British resident to have sex with a child under the age of 16 anywhere in the world. Yeah. So if an aid worker has sex with a child in the Democratic Republic of Congo, the Democratic Republic of Congo police should arrest them, should throw them in jail. Do we have confidence in the Democratic Republic of Congo justice system? Not really. But here's the kicker. If someone takes that evidence and informs the British police should put that person on trial. So what I'm saying is the first thing the United Nations should do is stop all of these internal investigations they do, right? So the way the process works, someone is accused of a child abuse. The Office of Internal Oversight of the United Nations looks at it for a year and a half and comes out with a report and says, nothing proved. Now, if you've raped a child in a refugee camp in the middle of a conflict zone, where is that child a year and a half later?
Nobody knows.
Where is the DNA evidence a year and a half later? Where are the witnesses a year and a half later? If you delay the investigation long enough, the evidentiary chain has got so cold, there is no way in hell you can ever prove it. And the last time I looked, the United Nations is not a criminal investigative branch. The last time I looked, the United Nations does not understand and know the rules of evidence in front of the criminal courts in the United Kingdom or the United States, etc. So they should stop these internal investigations. The one thing, whenever there is an accusation of child abuse against a foreign aid worker, the aid agency, the UN, Save the Children, Oxfam, whomever it is, should do 2 things straight away. 1, tell the local police. And 2, tell the police of the home nationality of the perpetrator. Yeah. And then help the police gather all of the evidence that they can. Internal investigations must stop.
Well, you might take a multi-layer approach so you can still see if that works, but this needs to be done. And this has been recommended to them,
That's right.
Including by you. So what's the response to that? Again,
no, they won't do it.
Why? Oh, they don't know.
Because the problem is so big, it threatens the very viability of the industry. I mean, if you go back to those numbers, 300,000 male aid workers, take the assumption of 5%, a likelihood of 15,000 pedophiles today, right now. And here's something to understand about pedophilia that might shock your audience a little bit. People don't like talking about pedophiles. They say they're sick, they're crazy people, right? That's not what the psychologists say. The psychologists dress it up this way, and they say human attraction is hardwired into your brain. Some like tall, some like short, some like fat, some like skinny, some like blonde, some like brunette, some are heterosexual, some are homosexual. Your attraction is what's hardwired into you. Some like old, some like young. Okay. That's why the National Crime Agency says there's an underlying prevalence of about 3%. It's not a sickness, it's a hardwiring in the brain. Having the attraction is not a moral decision. Acting upon the attraction is a moral decision. Like, I don't know if you're gay or straight, doesn't bother me. You see a good-looking person walking down the street and you go, wow, that person's cute, right? Yeah. That's a natural reaction. I'm sure you've done it 100 times. I'm sure your listeners and viewers have done it hundreds of times. But when you see a good-looking person walking down the street and you go, wow, that person's cute, do you go up and feel their ass just to check? And the answer is no, of course you don't. Yeah. And that's the difference between having an attraction and acting upon the attraction. Okay. Same with pedophilia. Pedophiles will look at a children and have an attraction. Whether they act upon that attraction or not is the moral decision, and preventing them from acting upon that attraction is where we need to focus all of our effort, and then punishing them for acting upon that attraction if they're caught. Prevention, detection, prosecution. Yeah. How do you prevent? Well, prevent is really bloody hard because pedophiles don't have pedophile written across their forehead.
No, but if you know you're going to fly into police, then that might help.
Yeah, well, no, this is it. This is exactly it. Every criminologist will tell you the size of a penalty does not deter crime. Fear of detection does. Yeah, exactly. Currently, fear of detection for pedophiles in the aid industry is 0. How many British aid workers have been charged under Section 72 of the Sexual Offences Act? Answer, 0. And 0 is a very, very powerful number because 0 tells you nothing is happening. How many of Oxfam staff have Oxfam reported to the police? Answer, 0. How many UN staff have been reported to the police? Not quite 0, but very bloody close to 0. And the message that you're sending to these predators, who aren't stupid, they are rat cunning. They're evil, but they're rat cunning. The signal we're sending to them is, even if you get caught, you'll get away with it because no one's going to investigate you, no one's going to punish you. For example, there's a guy named Peter Dalgleish, very senior in UNICEF, the UN Children's Fund, charged with protecting children, won the Order of Canada, is a personal friend of Justin Trudeau's. Everyone recognises he is really important in the whole UNICEF structure. Retired a couple of years ago, set up an orphanage in Nepal. What a lovely guy. Surprise, surprise. It then finds out that orphanage he set up is a front for child trafficking and he's now in jail in Nepal. Because the Nepalese police finally acted where the UN didn't. This is everywhere. And the really important thing to understand about this not being a sickness, it being a hardwired evilness and with an underlying prevalence, it doesn't matter which institution you look at. If someone says, is there a pedophile in this institution? Just go 3% of the male population. Are there pedophiles in British Parliament? Well, British Parliament has 650 MPs, about 400 of them are male, 3% is 12. There are about 12 pedophiles in British Parliament. Are there pedophiles in Australian Parliament? Well, there are 175 MPs in the lower house. There's 50 in the upper house. So I think it's about 120 males, 4% of which is, there are 3. Yeah. And when you start looking at it in that way and understanding that this is a prevalence and you do it by a mathematical vulnerability, it changes completely the way you do detection. Because if you think it's a sickness, somehow you think you can filter it out of your system and you can't. When you realize that you can't filter it out, you need to detect, which means you've got to protect the whistleblowers. You've got to protect the people that name them. And again, in the UN, what's the record of whistleblowers? They get fired. So if you see this and you're vulnerable in your job, are you going to report it? Not if you think you're going to get fired and the pedophile is going to get away with it. So we can't really detect. We can't prevent if we don't protect the whistleblowers. And if we don't protect the whistleblowers and don't find out these people, we can never prosecute them. And if we don't prosecute them, we're just sending the signal to the pedophiles, come on down, the aid industry is a free target. And the last thing I'll say on this point is think about it this way. If I stand outside a primary school in London wearing a trench coat, someone's going to call the police within 30 minutes. If I stand outside a primary school in the Democratic Republic of Congo wearing a UNICEF t-shirt, within 30 minutes, I'm going to have a smorgasbord of choice. That's the vulnerability we are putting children in with our taxpayer funds. We are sending these people to those countries and then turning a blind eye to it.
All right. So if you go to heartheircries.org, your website, your organization, one of the focus points that you have is lobbying United Nations for whistleblower protection. Could you explain to me how whistleblower protection is currently arranged within United Nations, if at all?
There's a theoretical answer and a practical answer. The theoretical answer is yes, we have all of these protections in place. Whistleblowers will be protected. They will be looked after. It's not going to be a problem. You won't lose your job. That's the theoretical answer. That's what's written in all of the documents. What actually happens is exactly what happens to Andrus Koppers.
And Ms. Roelie Post, I mentioned that to you, which is the Dutch whistleblower from European Commission.
Yeah, and Miranda Brown, and. You know, there is a list of whistleblowers.
So other...
And by the way, if your listeners or viewers are interested in this, they should look up the movie Whistleblower starring Rachel Weisz. It is a movie that describes a US policewoman seconded into the United Nations who blew the whistle on the child trafficking trade in Bosnia, where UN security staff, wait for this one, were trafficking 14 and 15-year-old girls from Moldova into Bosnia during the war, chaining them up in a nightclub called Florida 2000 for the exclusive use of UN staff. She blew the whistle on that and has never worked again in her life.
So how should we proceed then, Andrew?
We need PDP, protection, detection and prosecution. But what I'm also calling upon is for other countries in the world to follow Australia's law. Australia now makes it unlawful to a criminal offence to fail to report an overseas child sex offence. And Australia has now strengthened their law in what's called a command responsibility. So you can also charge someone with a criminal offence for failing to prevent. So what I'm ultimately wanting to do is find more and more of these people. And the moment I find several working in the same industry or the same agency, I'm going to take the CEO and the trustees to court. I'm going to launch a private prosecution for failing to prevent. Yeah. Only when we hold the trustees and the CEOs to account will we get real change. Only when the trustees and the CEOs have a fear of going to jail will they actually stop the perpetrators below them.
Oh, sounds like a plan.
And I would say this to all of your listeners and all of your viewers. If you have a friend who's an aid worker or who works for a charity, just ask them this question. What are you doing to stop this? Because if their answer is, oh, I don't know it, or I don't see it, or I don't think it's true, or I'm not doing anything, they are complicit as well.
Yeah. And law should be changed to force you to take action if you see something or
That's right.
Okay, fair enough. Okay,
and Australia has changed its law already, so we have the model.
Australia has, Is that the only one then?
Yep.
Why are they front running this thing?
I think Australia, along with Germany, have been front runners in countering sex tourism for many, many years. When the extraterritorial child sex tourism laws started about 20 odd years ago, it was countries like Australia and Germany that took the lead. I also think Australia is in a funny position because it's geographically in Asia. Its modern history comes from Europe. So it's got this split dichotomy, which part are we Asian, which parts are we European? But we've got very strong connections with our Asian partners, Thailand, Cambodia, Philippines, Indonesia. But these are countries which 20 years ago and even today have real problem with child sex tourists. So we actually saw, or Australia actually saw, it's a big responsibility to our neighbours that many of the child sex tourists that are going to Cambodia, Thailand, Philippines, etc., are Americans, Germans, British, and Australians. So we've got to fulfill our responsibility to our neighbours. Whereas most of the Western countries, their neighbours are other Western countries. Not in Australia. Our neighbours are developing world countries.
Yeah, if you want to be a sex tourist from Australia, that's easy. It's close by. Easier than from Holland.
So we now have, for example, very, very detailed relationships between the Australian Federal Police and the Philippines National Police, for example.
Okay.
So when someone is on the sex watch list in Australia and we detect them traveling to Philippines, we immediately inform the Filipino National Police.
And that would work. So that's the point that you're making, right?
Yeah.
That will work. Okay, excellent. All right. Andrew Macleod, well, thanks for being blunt about everything. That's maybe the only thing to get these things across.
You Dutch people are about the only people that accept the bluntness of Australians, because the Dutch are just as blunt as we Australians are.
It's true. Yeah, I've worked in many countries, and when I get into trouble working with the other people, it's because you're outspoken.
Yes, yeah.
That's true. So, you've written a book in 2013. It's called A Life Half Lived, Surviving the World's Emergency Zones. That's also where you discussed your experiences and what you've seen through the world. But you've also written 2 other books.
Yes.
And I want to end with on that closing note, because when I invited you for this interview, you said, well, we have to do it this week, because next week I'm off to the Arctic for a few weeks. So then I went to look up what you've been doing and what you've been writing, and it's about well-being, mental health, and how we think about our own personal futures, and how such prospection is connected to our well-being and mental health. So are you going to the Arctic for your... What are you going to the Arctic for?
I'm going for fun. You know, I'm not married, no kids, right? Which means I have a low expense level. So I spend the equivalent of 2 children's education on travel every year. Some people have children, I travel. And I love to visit other countries and other cultures, learn about people, learn about how things are doing. So on Monday, I'm flying up to Edinburgh, hopping on a boat, then we're going to Shetland Islands, Orkney Islands, Faroe Islands, up to Svalbard, then I'm going across to Greenland and then back. Because I also want to see the polar bears in the wild before climate change kills them.
Well, I'm jealous. So my history is I did all that traveling also, and then we had kids. So now I'm stuck here in Holland, so I can relate.
Yeah. How many countries did you do that?
I didn't count, but we've been to every continent, but not the extremes like small bit, which you said. But we've I don't know, just the big tour. Well, we've been to New Zealand. That would be the farthest away. And Galapagos Islands at Ecuador.
I've scuba dived in the Antarctic, which is awesome. And I'll tell you what was really good about it. So you're dressed up in this dry suit.
Yeah.
And you're hopping along this little rubber boat, and you think the best bit about scuba diving in the Antarctic is going to be going underwater. The scientists say seals have the intelligence of roughly a 7-year-old human being. Very, very intelligent creatures. And the wildlife down in the Antarctic has no predatory fear of human beings because they see so few human beings. So we're going along this boat, we're in this dry suit, these seals swim up, and they're like, come in and play.
Yeah.
And we're all dressed up in all this dry suit gear ready to go underwater. It's like, well, why not?
Yeah.
So we jump over the boat, we splash in, we got these seals playing around with us, and after a while they start heading off in this direction, and they're kind of doing this, come with us.
Come with us.
So we come with them, and they've got this little iceberg, which 10, 20 meters long, with a steep bit and a shallow bit on it, right? And they were climbing up the steep bit and slippery dipping down the shallow bit. So the seals did this a couple of times, and then they've stopped, and then they've gone, like, your turn.
No, you slide. Yeah.
So we slide. And we were going round and round these slides with these seals. It was unfrigging believable.
Well, thanks for making
photos of it. And by the way, I have a YouTube channel as well. So back in 2002 or 3, when I was working for the UN, my little brother called me up one day, and he said, "What's your life like in the UN?" I said, "Listen, I got my first ever digital camera. I can do video clips. I'll make you a little movie." So I made him a movie of my day-to-day life, burnt it onto DVD because this was before YouTube, and I posted it to him. And he's like, "Wow, great, make me another one." So I made him another one, posted it to him. "Wow, make me another one." So I made him another one, posted it to him. And then when YouTube came out, it's like, "Listen, Ben, it's going to be a lot easier if I just upload it to YouTube and send you the link." So I upload it to YouTube and send the link. So I make these movies. The grand audience is one. It's for my little brother. A couple of years ago, he unfortunately died. But I still make these movies because it's my way of communicating with him. When I talk to the camera, I'm still talking to my little brother, Ben. So I've now got on YouTube, for anyone that's interested, just home videos, 135 videos from different parts of the world.
Send me the link and I'll put it up with the footage. Thanks for ending this thing on such a positive note. And
the world is a good place, actually. Yeah. There's a lot of shitty things that happen in it. Let me finish this. If you just read the newspapers, you would think the world is horrible, war, conflict, poverty, terror. You know, you'd be thinking terrible. But think about it this way. 2018 was the best year in human history on a number of measures. Fewest number of women dying in maternal mortality. Fewest number of children dying in infant mortality as a proportion of the global population. highest number of people completing primary school, highest number of people completing secondary school, highest access to electricity, highest access to water, highest access to the internet, fewest people dying as a proportion of global population in war than ever before, one of the lowest years for dying at the hands of terrorism than ever before as a proportion of the global population. On almost every quality of life indicator that there is, 2018 was the best year in human history.
Thanks for ending this on a positive. Let's make 2019 even better.
Exactly.
Take care. Bye-bye.